Standing in the ruins of an ancient amphitheater, you cup your hands and whisper only to hear your own voice ripple back to you with startling precision, as if the stones themselves are alive. No microphones, no speakers, no electricity, just pure, unfiltered sound echoing across centuries. This is the forgotten genius of civilizations long gone, where architects and engineers mastered the art of acoustics in ways that still baffle us today. From the whispering galleries of Rome to the sonic temples of the Maya, these empires built structures that could carry a single word for miles, bending sound like invisible threads through the air. How did they do it, and why, in an age of endless technological advancement, do these ancient echo machines remain some of the most mysterious marvels of human ingenuity? Picture a world without wires, without circuits, where the only power source was the human voice and the clever arrangement of stone. In Greece, theaters were carved into hillsides so precisely that even the softest sigh from the stage could reach the highest seats. In the jungles of Central America, pyramids were designed to amplify the chants of priests, turning rituals into thunderous events that could be heard for leagues. These weren't accidents, they were deliberate feats of acoustic engineering, achieved with nothing but intuition, observation, and an intimate understanding of how sound dances through space. What's even more astonishing, many of these techniques were lost to time, buried under the rubble of empires or overshadowed by modern technology. But here's the thing, these ancient echo machines weren't just about practicality. They were about connection. Imagine a ruler addressing thousands without a megaphone, or a storyteller weaving tales that resonated through an entire city. These were the social networks of their day, binding communities together through shared sound. And that's what makes them so fascinating. They remind us that innovation isn't always about complexity. Sometimes the most brilliant solutions are the simplest ones, hidden in plain sight. So let's step into the echo chambers of history and listen closely. Because the secrets of these forgotten empires might just hold the key to rethinking how we communicate, even in our noisy, digital world. The ancient builders didn't have oscilloscopes or decibel meters. They had something far more powerful: keen observation and generations of trial and error. Picture a stonemason in ancient Greece tapping different rocks with a hammer, listening carefully to how long the sound lingered, or a Mayan priest clapping his hands at the base of a pyramid, counting how many times the echo returned before fading. These weren't just random experiments, they were early forms of acoustic science, where every echo and reverberation told a story about how sound moved through space. Take the famous Whispering Gallery in St. Paul's Cathedral, where a murmur against one curved wall travels clearly to someone standing over 100 feet away. This wasn't some happy accident of architecture. Medieval builders understood that smooth, curved surfaces could channel sound like a hidden pathway, bouncing whispers along the stone like a marble rolling along a groove. Similarly, in the jungles of Chichen Itza, the steps of El Castillo pyramid were designed so precisely that a handclap at the base produces an eerie chirping echo, mimicking the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. These weren't mere party tricks, they were demonstrations of an empire's mastery over physics itself. What's truly remarkable is how these cultures independently arrived at similar solutions across continents. The Greeks used stepped seating in their theaters to break up sound waves, preventing echoes from muddying speeches. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Maya built their ball courts with parallel walls that created a distinct sound corridor, making every ritual chant resonate with supernatural clarity. Though separated by oceans and centuries, Both civilizations discovered that angles mattered, that slightly tilting a surface or adjusting a corner could mean the difference between garbled noise and crystal clear projection. This shared wisdom points to something deeper, a universal human instinct to harness our environment. Without blueprints or calculators, these architects became sound engineers through sheer persistence. They learned that dense limestone reflected sound better than porous sandstone, that rounded chambers amplified while angular ones dispersed, that placing a speaker's platform over hollow spaces created natural bass resonance. Every innovation was etched into stone through centuries of listening, adjusting, and perfecting. Perhaps the most humbling realization: some of these ancient acoustic feats still can't be perfectly replicated today. Modern attempts to rebuild the Epidorus theater's legendary acoustics often fall short of the original's perfection. It's a reminder that knowledge isn't always linear, that sometimes the past holds secrets we're still straining to hear. As we stand in these ancient spaces today, the walls don't just echo our voices, they whisper lessons about patience, observation, and the incredible things humans can achieve when we truly listen to the world around us. The Greek amphitheater at Epidorus isn't just an architectural marvel, it's a time capsule of acoustic genius. Every seat in that semicircle of limestone isn't merely placed, it's calibrated. The curvature of each row acts like a satellite dish catching whispers from the stage, while the steep incline ensures sound waves bounce upward instead of getting swallowed by the crowd. But here's what's truly remarkable: the Greeks accounted for nature itself. By positioning the theater against a hillside, they created a natural windbreak, preventing gusts from scattering voices across the valley. Even the material choice was deliberate. That porous limestone absorbed low-frequency murmurs from the audience while reflecting the actors' higher-pitched voices with crystal clarity. What most people miss is how these theaters functioned as democratic instruments. In a world before amplification, the poorest farmer in the highest seat heard Sophocles' verses just as clearly as the aristocrats in front. This wasn't just entertainment, it was social engineering through sound. The Greeks even embedded subtle tricks beneath the stage. Hollow chambers called resonance boxes were placed under the orchestra floor, acting like natural subwoofers to enrich vocal tones. Actors wore masks with exaggerated mouth openings, not just for visibility, but to function as primitive megaphones, shaping their voices into precise projectiles of sound. The real magic lies in what we're still discovering. Modern archaeologists found that the perfect harmony of Epidorus dimensions, the ratio of stage width to seating diameter, creates an acoustic sweet spot where sound self-amplifies. It's as if the entire structure hums in tune with human speech. Recent studies show that frequencies between 500 and 1000 Hz, the range of a speaking voice, get boosted by the very shape of the stone, while background noise cancels itself out through wave interference. The Greeks may not have known the physics terms, but they mastered the effects through relentless observation. Perhaps the most humbling part: we've lost the manual. While we can measure Epidorus acoustics with lasers, no ancient text survives explaining how they achieved this precision. The knowledge likely passed through generations of builders whispering trade secrets, much like the voices that still dance across those stones today. Standing in that silent theater now, you realize it's not just a relic, it's a challenge, a reminder that sometimes the most advanced technology doesn't plug in. It just listens. The Romans didn't just build walls, they wove sound into the very fabric of their architecture. At Hadrian's villa, a hushed conversation near one curved corridor could travel with eerie clarity to someone standing dozens of feet away, as if the stones themselves were carrying secrets. This wasn't magic, it was meticulous engineering. The semicircular design of these whispering galleries acted like an invisible funnel, catching even the softest breath and channeling it along the smooth marble surface with almost no loss of volume. What makes these Roman innovations stand out is their intentionality. Unlike the grand amphitheaters meant for public spectacle, these intimate acoustic spaces were designed for discretion. Historians believe elite Romans used them for private negotiations, confidential meetings, or even romantic liaisons where a whisper could bypass eavesdroppers as effectively as modern encryption. The precision required was staggering. Architects had to calculate the exact curvature needed to reflect sound waves without scattering them, all while maintaining structural integrity. They achieved this through an ingenious blend of geometry and material science, selecting stones with just the right density to bounce voices cleanly rather than absorb them. The real mystery lies in their tools. Without lasers or acoustic modeling software, Roman builders likely relied on water levels and weighted strings to map perfect curves. Some scholars suggest they used bronze discs as primitive sound reflectors during construction, testing echoes by striking them at different points along unfinished walls. Others point to surviving manuscripts describing how architects would position assistants at intervals to call out measurements, using human voices as living tuning forks. Hadrian's villa offers a particularly brilliant example. Its so-called maritime theater features a circular portico where whispers loop continuously around the circumference. Stand in the right spot, and you can hear your own voice return to you seconds later, transformed by the journey through stone. Modern acoustic surveys reveal the walls there have near-perfect sound reflectivity, with surface irregularities measuring less than a millimeter, a tolerance rivaling today's concert halls. Perhaps most impressive is how these techniques spread across the empire. Similar whispering effects appear in Roman bathhouses from Britain to Syria, proving this wasn't isolated genius but standardized knowledge. The baths of Caracalla in Rome used vaulted ceilings to create cascading echoes that amplified the sounds of flowing water into a soothing roar. In Pompeii, narrow streets between high walls acted as natural sound amplifiers, allowing shopkeepers to call customers from blocks away. What we're really hearing in these ancient walls is a civilization that treated sound as both science and art. They understood that architecture wasn't just about shelter, it was about controlling space, manipulating perception, and crafting experiences. In an age before microphones, they turned entire buildings into communication devices, and that might be their greatest lesson. Sometimes the most advanced technology doesn't come from circuits and wires, but from reimagining what's already in our hands, or in their case, what was already beneath their feet. Deep in the steamy jungles of the Yucatan Peninsula, the steps of El Castillo Pyramid don't just lead upward, they sing. Clap your hands at the base, and the echo doesn't simply bounce back. It transforms, rippling through the humid air as a series of sharp chirps that uncannily mimic the cry of the sacred Quetzal bird. This isn't random acoustics at play, it's sonic engineering carved in stone. The Maya didn't just build pyramids, they designed instruments where every step, every angle, every surface was tuned to manipulate sound with almost musical precision. What's astonishing is how they achieved this without modern tools. The staircase acts like a giant sound filter, each step spaced at intervals that break up echoes into distinct frequencies. When sound waves hit these staggered surfaces, they don't merge into a muddy reverberation. Instead, they fracture into clean, piercing notes that stack atop one another, creating that iconic chirping effect. Researchers have measured it. The pyramid's echo matches the Quetzal's call at around 1,500 Hz, a frequency that carries eerily well through dense jungle. But here's where it gets even more deliberate. The Quetzal wasn't just any bird. It was a divine messenger, its feathers worn by kings and priests as symbols of connection to the gods. By embedding its call into the very stones of their temples, the Maya blurred the line between architecture and ritual. Imagine standing in the plaza during a ceremony, hearing what seemed like spirits answering from the heavens with every clap or drumbeat. It wasn't just awe-inspiring, it was theological engineering, using physics to manifest the supernatural. The precision goes deeper than sound. El Castillo's staircases align with celestial events. The spring and autumn equinoxes paint shadows that slither like serpents down the steps. This fusion of astronomy and acoustics suggests a culture that saw sound and light as intertwined forces. Recent laser scans reveal hidden irregularities in the steps' surfaces, tiny grooves and angles that seem arbitrary until you realize they're tweaking echoes like a luthier tuning a guitar. Some scholars argue these adjustments were made over generations, with builders listening and refining, turning the pyramid into a living instrument. What's most humbling, we're still decoding their methods. Modern architects have tried replicating the Quetzal effect with computer models, only to find the original still sounds clearer. It's as if the Maya understood something about sound waves that we're still piecing together, how humidity, temperature, and even the limestone's mineral content all play a role. Their echo chambers weren't just clever tricks, they were a language, one where stones spoke in birdsong and worshippers walked through symphonies carved in stone. Descending into chant Baori feels like stepping into an inverted cathedral, 3,500 perfectly symmetrical steps spiraling down 13 stories, each one a potential soundboard waiting to catch and amplify a voice. But what's truly remarkable isn't just the architecture, it's how these ancient builders harnessed water itself as an acoustic tool. When monsoon rains filled the well's base, the liquid surface became a mirror for sound, reflecting chants and drumbeats upward with startling clarity. The zigzagging steps acted like a fractal amplifier, breaking echoes into layers that ricocheted between walls, creating a chorus of overlapping reverberations. This wasn't accidental poetry, it was physics mastered through observation. The Stepwell's design exploited two principles modern concert halls strive for: sound diffusion and resonance. The staggered steps scattered high frequencies, preventing harsh echoes, while the deep central shaft emphasized lower tones, giving rituals a deep, booming presence. Historians believe priests used specific spots along the staircases as sweet spots, where a single clap could trigger a cascade of delayed echoes, mimicking the sound of rainfall. Imagine standing at the base during a ceremony, surrounded by voices that seemed to rise from the water itself, distorted yet intelligible, as if the well were translating human speech into something divine. The decline of these acoustic marvels reveals a deeper cultural shift. As oral traditions gave way to written texts, the need for communal listening spaces faded. Stepwells, once vibrant with echoing hymns and storytelling, became silent, their acoustics now an unintended artifact rather than a deliberate feature. Modern researchers have noted something poignant. Many later stepwells lack the precise acoustic tuning of earlier ones, suggesting builders gradually lost the knowledge as auditory rituals became less central to daily life. Yet the science behind these structures remains breathtaking. Water's reflective properties amplify sound nearly 6 times more effectively than dry stone, a fact the builders likely discovered through trial and error. The well's tapered shape, wider at the top, created a natural sound funnel that projected voices upward to listeners at ground level. Even the carvings on the walls played a role. Intricate geometric patterns helped scatter sound waves evenly, preventing the muffled quality you'd expect in such a cavernous space. Perhaps the most haunting lesson lies in what we've forgotten. recent attempts to revive Stepwell rituals often fall flat, literally, without the precise cadence and pauses ancient singers used to play the acoustics. Modern voices get lost in reverberation. It's a reminder that these wells weren't just instruments, they were duet partners, requiring generations of practiced collaboration between human voices and stone. The silence in their depths today isn't just an absence of sound, it's the echo of a lost conversation between architecture and oral tradition. Beneath the sun-baked streets of modern Malta lies a darkness that hums, an underground labyrinth where whispers twist into a chorus that seems to come from every direction at once. The Malta Hypogeum isn't just a burial site. It's a three-level symphony carved from solid limestone, where sound doesn't merely echo, it lives. Step into the so-called oracle chamber, speak softly, and your voice lingers for an impossible 8 seconds, vibrating through the walls with an eerie, low-frequency drone that modern researchers measure at precisely 110 Hz. That's no coincidence. At that frequency, something remarkable happens to the human brain. Studies show it can shift consciousness, easing listeners into a meditative or even trance-like state. How did Neolithic builders, working with nothing but stone and antler tools, craft a space that manipulates perception so precisely? The secret lies in the rock itself. The Hypogeum's chambers weren't hollowed out randomly, they were tuned. By chiseling rooms with specific proportions, many exactly matching golden ratio dimensions, the builders created natural resonating cavities. The limestone's density and porosity were carefully exploited. Thinner walls vibrate at higher pitches, while massive supporting pillars amplify bass tones. Even the paint used on the walls played a role. Red ochre pigments mixed with binders that subtly dampened harsh frequencies, smoothing echoes into that otherworldly hum. The most chilling evidence of their acoustic mastery, a small niche called the Holy of Holies. When male voices chant inside it, the sound waves synchronize with the chamber's resonant frequency, creating a standing wave so powerful it makes the air itself feel thick. Modern acousticians call this the frequency of fear, the same range that makes horror movie soundtracks so unsettling. Yet here, 5 millennia ago, it was likely used to transport worshippers into altered states during sacred rites. Archaeologists have found traces of repetitive chanting patterns in the clay floors, grooves worn by generations of bare feet moving in ritual circles. What defies explanation is their precision without measurement tools. Some theorists suggest builders used water-filled bowls as primitive frequency detectors, watching ripples change as they sculpted walls. Others point to the Hypogeum's alignment with nearby temples. Certain chambers amplify solstice sunrise frequencies filtered through above-ground portals. The truth may be simpler: centuries of trial and error passed down through oral tradition. Every chip of stone, every adjusted angle was a step toward acoustic perfection, turning burial chambers into instruments of transcendence. Today, visiting the Hypogeum feels like walking into a still-functioning machine. Guides demonstrate how a single struck note can reverberate through interconnected chambers, creating harmonies Neolithic priests might have used to simulate voices of the dead. The real mystery isn't just how they built it, but why the knowledge vanished. Later Maltese temples lack this acoustic sophistication, as if the secret died with the last keeper of the sound. Standing in that humming darkness, you realize this isn't just archaeology. It's a message in frequencies, waiting 5,000 years for someone to truly listen. The Temple of Heaven's echo wall doesn't just carry whispers, it bends them, sending words skimming along its smooth curve like stones skipping across water. This 400-year-old marvel in Beijing works so precisely that two people standing at opposite ends can hold a conversation in hushed tones, their voices hugging the wall's surface as if guided by invisible hands. The secret lies in the details. Each blue-glazed tile was set with mortar mixed with sticky rice glue, a formula that created an ultra-dense barrier where sound waves barely lose energy as they travel. Even the wall's perfect circularity matters. Modern laser measurements show less than 2 millimeters of deviation from its ideal curve, making it one of history's most accurate acoustic mirrors. But why did such brilliance fade? The answer whispers through the corridors of imperial history. As Ming gave way to Qing, architecture shifted from experiential wonder to visual spectacle. Later emperors prioritized towering roofs and intricate carvings, features that dazzled the eye but deadened the ear. The change reflects a deeper cultural pivot. Where once harmony between human and environment was paramount, think of the temple's alignment with solstice sunrises. Now dominance over nature became the ideal. You can trace it in the materials where echo wall builders used resonant ceramic. Later palaces opted for thick, sound-absorbing timber. Even the famous Hall of Prayer for Good Harvests, rebuilt in the 19th century, sacrificed some acoustic purity for gilded grandeur. What's often overlooked is how these echo chambers functioned as social technology. The same wall that let lovers exchange secret messages also served statecraft. Officials could discreetly share information during rituals without disrupting ceremonies. This dual purpose hints at why the knowledge faded. As China's bureaucracy grew more formalized, the need for such subtle communication dwindled. Written memorials replaced whispered counsel, just as visual symbols overtook auditory ones. Modern attempts to replicate the echo wall reveal just how sophisticated the original was. When conservators repaired a section in the 1990s using standard mortar, the patched area created an acoustic dead zone. It took months of experimenting with rice-based mixtures to restore the seamless sound transmission. That stumble underscores a profound truth. These weren't just buildings, but finely tuned instruments where every material choice played its part. Perhaps the real echo we're hearing today isn't just of voices bouncing off ancient walls, but of a lost philosophy that saw architecture as something to be heard as much as seen. Inside the Great Pyramid's subterranean chamber, something strange happens when you hum a low G. The sound doesn't just echo, it swells, filling the cramped space with vibrations that seem to come from the walls themselves. This isn't random acoustics at work. Recent scans reveal the chamber's dimensions create a resonant frequency matching the harmonic scale used in ancient Egyptian rituals. But here's the puzzle. With no surviving blueprints or treatises on sound, how did they engineer spaces that align so perfectly with musical intervals? The answer might lie in something far simpler than we imagine. Instead of complex calculations, the Egyptians likely relied on the oldest acoustic tool of all, the human body. Priests chanting in these chambers would have felt vibrations in their chests when hitting the right notes, a physical feedback loop guiding them to certain pitches. The pyramid's granite walls, dense and unyielding, reflect sound with almost no absorption, turning the entire space into a kind of stone tuning fork. Modern experiments show that singing specific harmonic sequences in the Queen's chamber produces eerie overtones, as if the room itself is singing back. What's often overlooked is the role of materials. The Egyptians didn't just stack blocks, they curated them. Limestone casing stones absorbed higher frequencies, while granite sarcophagi emphasized lower tones, creating natural bass amplification. Even the air itself played a part. The chamber's constant 20 degrees Celsius temperature and stable humidity preserved sound wave clarity in ways that fluctuating outdoor conditions would disrupt. The most tantalizing clues come from temple reliefs. At Dendera, carvings show priests holding peculiar crescent-shaped instruments near their throats, early megaphones. Others depict chanting rituals where participants grip their sternums, possibly monitoring resonance. These aren't just artistic choices, they are snapshots of a culture that treated sound as tangible energy. Yet the silence in the historical record is deafening. Unlike Greek or Roman architects, the Egyptians left no manuals explaining their acoustic designs. Some scholars argue this was intentional, that sonic knowledge was reserved for initiates, passed down orally to maintain its sacred power. Here's where modern science fills the gaps. Laser scans of Saqqara's pyramids reveal hidden shafts that act like wind instruments, channeling desert breezes into harmonic drones. At Abu Ghurab, the so-called Sun Temple features alabaster basins that ring like crystal glasses when struck, tuned to frequencies matching healing chants in later Coptic traditions. Perhaps the greatest lesson isn't how they did it, but why. In a civilization where words held creative power, where myths told of the god Ptah speaking the world into existence, controlling sound wasn't just engineering. It was theology carved in stone. When we stand in these chambers today, we're not just hearing echoes, we're listening to the ghost of a philosophy where architecture and incantation were two sides of the same sacred coin. Walk into a reconstructed Viking Mead hall, and you'll immediately notice something strange, even with a roaring fire and dozens of people laughing. A single spoken word from the high seat carries effortlessly to the farthest bench. This wasn't just convenient architecture, it was cultural necessity. In a society where laws, history, and legends lived only in spoken words, ensuring every syllable reached every ear wasn't just about volume, it was about survival. The Norse didn't just build halls, they crafted giant wooden throats designed to project the human voice across generations. Take the legendary hall at Uppsala, where sagas describe kings' voices rolling like thunder across the feasting tables. Archaeologists found the secret in the roof, overlapping wooden beams arranged in precise triangular patterns that catch and redirect sound downward, while the steeply pitched ceilings prevent echoes from smearing together. The walls tell another story. Vertical planks spaced finger-width apart act like a natural filter, absorbing low-frequency noise from clattering dishes while letting higher-pitched voices slice through. Even the longfire's placement was acoustic engineering. Its central position created rising heat that carried sound upward to the rafters, where it would bounce back down evenly across the room. But here's what truly binds these halls to Viking identity. They were tuned for poetry, not prose. Skaldic verses rely on alliteration and meter patterns that resonate differently than everyday speech. The hall's dimensions amplified consonants over vowels, making the sharp K sounds in a Kenning's metaphor pop, while the drawn-out oo of an epic line would linger just long enough to feel supernatural. Modern linguists recreated this effect by reciting the saga of Eric the Red in a reconstructed hall without microphones. Complex kennings like wave steed for ships or battle light for swords registered clearly even over background noise, while mundane phrases got lost. The relationship between voice and wood went deeper than physics. Norse cosmology held that the world tree Yggdrasil carried whispers between realms. By building their halls from its earthly counterparts, oak for strength, pine for resonance, they created spaces where human speech could touch the divine. Some sagas even describe chieftains testing new halls by having skalds recite in different corners. If a single syllable faltered, carpenters would shave thin layers from certain beams until the balance was restored. This wasn't just carpentry, it was a dialogue between craftsmen and poets, each holding half the knowledge needed to make history audible. Perhaps most telling is what happened when Christianity arrived. Later medieval halls, built for reading sermons rather than reciting epics, lost these acoustic refinements. Flat ceilings replaced pitched ones, plaster dampened vibrations. The old ways persisted only in remote areas. Iceland's turf houses, descended from Viking designs, still exhibit that uncanny carry of voice from kitchen to bedchamber. Standing in one today, you realize these weren't just buildings. They were the first recording studios, with every joint and beam meticulously tuned to preserve stories too precious to risk being unheard. The ghosts of 1,000 sagas still hum in their timbers, waiting for someone to speak the right words and wake them again. Rising from the rooftops of ancient Persia like giant wooden flutes, the badgers did more than chase away the desert heat. They turned buildings into whispering giants. These ingenious wind catchers weren't just ventilation systems. They were vertical highways for sound, designed so precisely that a merchant on the ground floor could murmur a price and be heard clearly by his partner 3 stories up, as if the tower itself were leaning down to deliver secrets. The trick lay in the shaft's geometry, narrow enough to prevent echoes from scattering, yet wide enough to let air and sound flow smoothly. And the materials mattered just as much. Sun-baked clay tiles lining the interior absorbed excess moisture that could muffle voices, while strategically placed wooden baffles filtered out street noise without disrupting human speech. What's often overlooked is how these structures shaped social dynamics. In Yazd's Grand Bazaar, badgers turned entire market districts into discrete communication networks. Silk traders could negotiate across crowded floors without shouting, their voices riding the breeze like invisible threads. Historians have found evidence of sound sentries, apprentices posted at key shafts to relay messages between departments, a precursor to modern intercoms. Even the tower's orientation played a role, facing prevailing winds at precise angles to create gentle updrafts that carried speech upward, while downdrafts brought responses back down. This wasn't just physics, it was a culture that engineered privacy into public spaces. Yet the real marvel is how these towers handled noise pollution, a problem they ironically help highlight today. Modern attempts to recreate badger acoustics in cities fail because contemporary soundscapes are all wrong. Ancient Persian streets hummed at low frequencies, footsteps, donkey hooves, the rumble of cartwheels sounds the tower's design naturally filtered out. Compare that to today's urban cacophony of jackhammers, sirens, and engine drones, which hit frequencies that travel unpredictably through traditional shafts. It's a cruel irony. The very technologies that made these acoustic wonders possible, like motorized transport, are what rendered them obsolete. But the legacy lingers in unexpected places. Architects studying the badger's tapered shafts realized they function like giant versions of the ear's cochlea, narrowing progressively to separate frequencies. This insight inspired the curved acoustic panels in Berlin's Philharmonic Concert Hall. Meanwhile, Dubai's sustainability labs are testing hybrid wind towers with internal silicone dampeners to handle modern noise, proving ancient solutions can evolve. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in what these towers represent, a time when buildings listened as intently as they sheltered. Standing beneath a centuries-old badger in Isfahan, you can still hear the ghost of that philosophy. A faint whistle carrying fragments of conversation from floors above, a reminder that before we mastered electricity, we first mastered the art of making silence speak. For thousands of years, the red deserts of Australia hummed with an invisible network of sound, not wires or radio waves, but songlines weaving across the continent like melodic highways. Aboriginal cultures didn't just sing about the land, they sang with it, using natural amphitheaters in rock faces, resonant valleys, and even specific trees that functioned as living loudspeakers. A single clapstick's rhythm at Uluru could bounce between canyon walls, reaching listeners miles away with clarity that defies modern physics. These weren't mere songs, they were sonic maps encoding everything from waterhole locations to ancestral stories in precise melodic patterns that could be read by those who knew the code. The genius lay in their adaptability. In the Kimberley region, singers exploited the acoustic properties of sandstone gorges, their porous surfaces filtering out wind noise while amplifying certain vocal frequencies. Near the coast, tidal caves acted like natural echo chambers, with seawater levels adjusting reverberation times to mark seasonal changes. Even the spinifex grass played a role. Its dense clusters dampened excess echoes, preventing overlapping verses from becoming garbled during large gatherings. Each landscape feature became a deliberate component in what might be history's most sophisticated oral transmission system. Colonial disruption struck at the very heart of this technology. When indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their lands, it wasn't just territory they lost, it was their living library. A songline broken by fenced cattle stations or mining operations didn't merely fade. It left entire chapters of navigation and history suddenly silent. Missionaries compounded the damage by banning ceremonial songs, severing the chain of intergenerational knowledge transfer. The consequences ripple through time. Modern researchers have documented cases where elders attempting to revive dormant songlines find themselves standing before altered landscapes where the acoustics no longer answer correctly, like a key that no longer fits its lock. Yet resilience whispers through the cracks. Contemporary Aboriginal artists are weaving GPS coordinates into new songlines, adapting ancient techniques for fragmented territories. In Arnhem Land, digital mapping projects cross-reference traditional songs with satellite imagery, revealing uncanny correlations between melodic contours and geographic features. At the Sydney Opera House, a performance by the Bangarra Dance Theatre demonstrated how songlines can leap from stone to steel, their choreography using the building's modern acoustics to recreate the echo patterns of ancestral country. What emerges is a profound truth about these sonic maps. They weren't just describing the land, they were in dialogue with it. The same rock wall that amplified morning songs might dampen evening ones, creating a natural timekeeping system. Specific notes would trigger distinct echoes from particular rock art sites, functioning as acoustic signposts. This wasn't music superimposed on landscape, it was landscape becoming music. When colonial fences severed these pathways, it wasn't merely a cultural loss but an ecological one, silencing a conversation between people and place that had sustained both for millennia. Now, as archaeologists use laser scanning to uncover hidden resonances in ancient meeting places, we're beginning to hear faint traces of that dialogue again. At a remote site in the Northern Territory, scientists found grooves carved into stone platforms that vibrate at the exact frequency of ceremonial didgeridoo, playing proof that these weren't just stages but finely tuned instruments. Perhaps the most hopeful sound is the growing movement to protect sacred sites not just as visual landmarks, but as acoustic ones, recognizing that some histories aren't written on the land but sung through it. Perched on Crete's wind-battered cliffs, strange curved stones face the sea like frozen tidal waves, ancient sentinels that may have given the Minoans ears sharper than any humans. These crescent-shaped walls, some spanning over 15 feet, aren't just architectural quirks, they're potential proof of a Bronze Age early warning system. When archaeologists first uncovered these structures, their precise parabolic curves seemed too deliberate to ignore. Replicas have shown that a whisper uttered at the focal point of one of these dishes can be heard clearly over 200 feet away, meaning the crash of oars or creak of wooden ships might have carried for miles across open water. What makes these acoustic mirrors so fascinating is their simplicity. Unlike modern radar arrays requiring power and complex electronics, the Minoan solution relied on pure geometry. By positioning guards at the focal points of multiple dishes along the coast, they could triangulate approaching vessels long before they appeared on the horizon. Some researchers believe the system was even more sophisticated, that the dishes were strategically placed to amplify specific frequencies, like the rhythmic splashing of warship oars while filtering out the random noise of waves. Yet these stone ears fell silent as Minoan dominance waned. The rise of naval warfare played a cruel trick on their ingenuity, as ships grew faster and attacks more sudden. Waiting to hear an enemy's approach became a fatal delay. The development of fortified harbors and watchtowers rendered the acoustic mirrors obsolete. Why listen for oars when you could see sails? Climate shifts may have sealed their fate. Pollen samples suggest increased rainfall in later centuries softened the air's acoustic conductivity, reducing the mirror's effective range. The real tragedy lies in the lost knowledge behind their construction. Modern engineers struggle to replicate the mirror's precision without laser levels. How did Bronze Age builders carve stones to mathematical perfection? Some theorize they used water-filled trenches as liquid guides to shape the curves. Others point to Minoan artifacts depicting what might be early protractors. Whatever their methods, the mirrors represent a dead branch on humanity's technological tree, an invention so perfectly adapted to its time and place that it couldn't survive the world's changes. Today, standing before these silent sentinels, you can almost hear the ghosts of their purpose. The wind humming along their curves sounds uncannily like distant ship hulls cutting through waves, a reminder that sometimes the most brilliant solutions aren't outgrown because they fail, but because the world around them moves on. High above the stone floors of Notre Dame, where stained glass bathes the air in colored light, something extraordinary happens when voices rise in Gregorian chant. The very walls seem to join the chorus. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's physics perfected over centuries. Medieval architects didn't just build cathedrals, they composed them, using mathematical ratios identical to musical intervals to turn entire naves into colossal instruments. The distance from floor to ceiling might match a perfect fifth, while the width of side aisles resonates at an octave below. Step into Chartres Cathedral and hum a low D, and you'll feel the note vibrate through your ribs as the space amplifies it, a phenomenon modern acoustic engineers call modal reinforcement. The secret lies in what scholars call sacred geometry. Builders use proportions derived from harmonic scales, the same ratios that make a vibrating string produce pleasing tones. For instance, the height-to-width ratio of many Gothic choirs is 5:8, mirroring the interval between the fifth and sixth notes of a major scale. Even the ribbed vaulting plays a role. Those intricate stone ribs aren't just decorative, they act like the braces of a violin, distributing vibrations evenly to prevent muddy echoes. The result, a single unaccompanied voice can fill a space meant for thousands, with every syllable crisp as a struck bell. But here's where it gets mystical. Many of these designs predate written acoustical theory. How did 12th century masons grasp concepts that would take scientists another 500 years to formalize? Some historians point to the influence of Pythagorean philosophy, smuggled into medieval Europe through Arabic texts. Others believe the knowledge emerged from sheer experimentation, centuries of monks adjusting arches by ear, much like piano tuners chasing perfect pitch. At Canterbury Cathedral, repairs in the 14th century included subtle alterations to the choir's curvature after musicians complained certain notes died prematurely. The mason's solution, carving tiny grooves into the stone to scatter sound waves more evenly, a technique still used in modern concert halls. The line between science and spirituality blurs in these stones. Medieval thinkers saw harmony as divine. The numerical relationships in music mirrored those in planetary orbits, human anatomy, and now sacred architecture. When a chant in Cologne Cathedral hits the exact frequency that makes the entire space hum, it's easy to understand why builders believed they were tracing God's blueprint. Modern laser scans reveal something astonishing. The cathedral's nave follows the Fibonacci sequence, a mathematical pattern found in seashells and flower petals, proof that these architects were tapping into universal principles they barely understood. Yet the true genius lies in their adaptability. Unlike the rigid symmetry of Romanesque churches, Gothic cathedrals employed calculated asymmetry. The north and south aisles of Rheims Cathedral differ slightly in width, not from error, but to create complementary resonances. Morning chants would benefit from the brighter acoustics of the sun-warmed southern side, while evening prayers gained depth from the cooler northern stone. Even the gargoyles served an acoustic purpose. Their strategically placed mouths acted as early sound diffusers, breaking up wind noise that might otherwise interfere with outdoor processions. What we're really hearing in these spaces is a dialogue between faith and physics. When restoration teams replaced Notre Dame's roof after the fire, they discovered charcoal layers beneath the lead, not just for waterproofing, but because medieval builders knew burnt wood absorbs excess base. Every decision, from the angle of flying buttresses to the thickness of mortar, was a balancing act between structural necessity and sonic perfection. Standing in the hushed twilight of Sainte-Chapelle, where the very air seems to vibrate with centuries of accumulated song, you realize these weren't just buildings, they were frozen music, waiting for human voices to bring them back to life. The Andes Mountains didn't just challenge the Inca Empire, they shaped it into a civilization that mastered sound. In this jagged world where roads disappeared into clouds and villages clung to cliffsides, shouting messages would seem hopeless. Yet the Incas built something remarkable, a network of stone shrines called huacas that functioned like natural telephones, turning the mountains themselves into messengers. These weren't random piles of rocks. Each huaca was strategically placed where the terrain would catch and amplify sound, creating relay stations that could carry a chasqui runner's warning or a commander's order across impossible distances. What's truly baffling is how they accounted for variables modern engineers struggle with. Thin, high-altitude air carries sound differently than at sea level. Higher frequencies fade faster, while lower tones gain unnatural clarity. The Incas seem to know this instinctively. Surviving accounts describe messengers using deep, rhythmic calls rather than sharp shouts, creating pulses of sound that sliced through wind shear. Some huacas were even positioned near concave rock faces that acted like parabolic reflectors, bouncing these bass, heavy tones between valleys with minimal distortion. Archaeologists testing reconstructed stations found certain syllables in Quechua, particularly vowel-heavy words like Ailu, community, projected nearly 40% farther than others, suggesting the language itself evolved to suit this sonic landscape. The real genius lay in their understanding of microclimates. Morning messages traveled eastward with the valley's rising thermals, while afternoon communications rode the cooler downdrafts westward. Some huacas were placed near glacial streams not just for water, but because the constant white noise helped mask competing sounds, creating a natural frequency channel. Even the architecture played tricks with acoustics. Rounded niches in certain shrines filtered out wind roar while amplifying human voices, like ancient noise-canceling technology. Yet the system's brilliance also made it fragile. When Spanish chroniclers described hearing Inca warnings echo across mountains hours before their arrival, they weren't just marveling, they were taking notes. Conquistadors soon learned to attack during rainstorms when wet air dampened the huaca's reach, or to position cannons where their thunderous booms would overload the relay points with chaotic echoes. Within decades, the knowledge of how to read the mountain's acoustic pathways faded, leaving modern researchers piecing together clues from pottery depictions and half-remembered oral traditions. Today, standing at a restored huaca near Cusco, you can still experience eerie remnants of this technology. Clap your hands and the echo doesn't just return, it spirals around the valley in widening circles, bouncing between shrines like a stone skipping across water. Scientists using laser microphones have mapped these sound pathways, discovering the Incas exploited something called acoustic shadowing, placing shrines just beyond ridges where sound waves naturally bend upward, creating clear transmission zones. The lesson echoing through these stones isn't just about ancient ingenuity, it's about listening to the land itself. Where we see impassable terrain, the Incas heard a conversation waiting to happen. Their lost art reminds us that sometimes the most advanced technology isn't something we build, but something we discover humming quietly in the bones of the world. Deep in the rainforests of West Africa, a language older than writing itself pulsed through the trees, not in words but in rhythms. The talking drums of the Yoruba and Akan people didn't just send signals, they spoke, replicating the tonal patterns of human speech so precisely that listeners miles away could hear proverbs, warnings, or even jokes with startling clarity. Carved from single logs and shaped like hourglasses, these drums had a secret. Their pitch could shift mid-beat, mimicking the rising and falling tones of languages like Yoruba, where a syllable's meaning changes with inflection. A skilled drummer didn't just play notes, they held conversations across valleys, turning the forest into a vast whispering gallery. What made these drums so revolutionary was their efficiency. While European armies relied on horseback messengers taking hours to deliver dispatches, a drum message could cross 50 miles in minutes, relayed from village to village like an ancient wireless network. Colonial administrators quickly realized the threat here was a communication system they couldn't control or intercept. British reports from 19th century Nigeria complain of seditious rhythms, spreading rebellion faster than troops could march. In the Gold Coast, drum codes alerted cocoa farmers to boycott colonial buyers, collapsing prices before authorities could react. The response was brutal. Drummers' hands were broken, instruments burned, and laws passed banning unauthorized messaging. But the suppression missed the genius of the technology. Unlike telegraph cables that could be cut or towers seized, the drums were decentralized, their knowledge lived in musicians' muscle memory. Even the drums themselves were ephemeral, carved from trees that regrew. Colonial forces couldn't silence what they didn't understand. Modern linguists studying surviving drum languages found they work like musical Morse code, not by spelling words, but by embedding meaning in rhythmic patterns. The phrase "come home" might be rendered as 3 quick beats, the tonal equivalent of "go", followed by 2 drawn-out ones, "return", with pauses acting like punctuation. The real tragedy is how much was lost. Certain ceremonial drums contained up to 7 tension pegs, allowing microtonal adjustments that could replicate a human sigh or a child's laugh. In Liberia, historians uncovered accounts of drum debates where elders would argue complex legal cases through rhythms while villagers listened like a jury. Some messages were even layered. A surface rhythm about market prices might conceal a deeper warning about approaching slavers. Today, the few remaining master drummers guard this knowledge like living libraries. In Benin, apprentices spend years learning to talk before they're allowed to send messages. What survives hints at a world where communication wasn't just about information, but connection, where a mother could drum a lullaby to her child in the next village, or lovers could exchange verses under the nose of colonial overseers. The drums didn't just carry words, they carried voices, and with them the defiant heartbeat of cultures that refused to be silenced. Beneath the vibrant costumes and dramatic makeup of kabuki theater lies an invisible art, the science of sound sculpted into wood. Those iconic Hanamichi walkways jutting through the audience aren't just for dramatic entrances, they're acoustic highways, built from resonant cypress with precisely spaced joints. These platforms channel an actor's voice outward like a living megaphone, while hollow compartments beneath the stage amplify footsteps into thunderous emotional cues. But the real magic hides in the walls' layers of woven straw and clay packed between wooden slats, creating natural sound filters that dampen street noise while enhancing vocal harmonics. Modern acousticians have measured these effects and found something astonishing. The angle of the Hanamichi's railing mirrors the exact slope needed to bounce sound waves toward balcony seats. Even the wooden floorboards play a role. Their varying thicknesses create subtle frequency shifts, preventing echoes from muddying rapid-fire dialogue. When a kabuki actor stamps during a climactic Mai pose, the hollow, sapon trapdoors beneath them don't just produce a dramatic boom. They generate low-frequency vibrations that audiences literally feel in their chests, bypassing ears to strike directly at the emotions. The legacy of these innovations echoes in unexpected places. Broadway's thrust stages owe their intimacy to the Hanamichi principle, while the layered walls of Tokyo's Suntory Hall use updated versions of straw and clay damping. Even Hollywood soundstages employ kabuki-inspired, variable acoustics, adjustable panels that replicate the way traditional shoji screens could transform a scene's sonic atmosphere in seconds. Perhaps most telling is how modern architects have revived these ancient techniques for sustainability. The natural materials kabuki builders used are now prized for their carbon-neutral sound control. Yet something intangible was lost in translation. Kabuki's acoustics weren't just functional, they were narrative. The creak of a hidden floorboard signaled a ghost's entrance long before the actor appeared. The direction of voice traveled along the Hanamichi could imply whether a character was lying or truthful. Contemporary theaters may replicate the physics, but rarely the philosophy. That sound should shape story as much as scenery. Standing in the kabukiza today, you realize these stages weren't just designed to be heard, they were built to listen, responding to every whisper and footfall with the precision of a centuries-old conversation between wood and human breath. High on Armenia's volcanic plateaus, scattered boulders hide an eerie secret. Strike them just right, and they ring like rusted church bells, their metallic tones vibrating through the thin mountain air. These aren't ordinary rocks, they're Vishapakar or dragon stones, weathered remnants of ancient lava flows with crystalline structures so dense and uniform that they behave like giant tuning forks. Geologists confirm their unique composition: basalt shot through with iron-rich minerals that create internal resonating chambers, but local shepherds have known their power for millennia. Stories passed down through generations tell of priests striking specific stones to summon storms, or warriors using their eerie chimes to coordinate attacks across fog-shrouded valleys. What makes these singing stones truly mysterious is their intentional placement. Many cluster near Bronze Age petroglyphs depicting ritual dances, their surfaces worn smooth from repeated strikes. Archaeologists have uncovered small, fist-sized striker stones nearby, each grooved to fit a human hand, proof these weren't accidental discoveries, but instruments honed through trial and error. The most compelling evidence lies in the stone's acoustics. When mapped, they form precise geometric patterns aligned with solstice sunrises, suggesting they functioned as both calendar and concert hall. Strike one at dawn during midsummer, and the sound carries for miles, bouncing between neighboring outcrops in cascading harmonics. Legends whisper of larger stones now lost monoliths that could sing for days after being struck, their vibrations supposedly healing the sick or guiding lost travelers. Modern experiments lend eerie credence to these tales. When researchers at Yerevan University recreated the striker technique described in medieval manuscripts, certain tones triggered measurable changes in brainwave patterns, inducing states of heightened focus. Other frequencies caused nearby quartz deposits to vibrate sympathetically, creating secondary chimes that seemed to come from empty air, a phenomenon that might explain accounts of spirit voices echoing from the mountains. Yet the stone's true purpose remains encrypted in their sound. Unlike man-made bells with predictable notes, each Vishapakar produces multiple tones depending on where it's struck, like a Stone Age piano. Some scholars believe this was intentional, that different sequences conveyed specific messages, turning the landscape into a kind of lithic Morse code. At Zorat's Kera, the so-called Armenian Stonehenge, over 200 upright stones exhibit strike marks at identical heights, hinting at a lost system of tonal communication. The most plausible theory: these were the tools of K-Erd, traveling musician priests who used the stones to map sacred knowledge into sound, creating audio maps of pilgrimage routes or warnings of seismic activity encoded in rhythmic patterns. Standing among these resonant rocks today, you're not just hearing geology, you're eavesdropping on an ancient dialogue between humans and stone. The wind hitting the pockmarked surfaces produces faint, fluting notes, as if the mountains themselves are humming fragments of forgotten hymns. It's a reminder that long before we invented writing, we were writing music into the very bones of the earth, turning landscapes into libraries of vibration. The stones still remember the songs. The question is whether we've forgotten how to listen. Descending into Istanbul's Basilica Sistine feels like stepping into a submerged cathedral where whispers cling to the damp air like mist. Those towering rows of columns aren't just holding up the ceiling, they're turning the entire space into a labyrinth of echoes, where a single footstep ripples outward in layers, bouncing off marble and water with unnatural clarity. But here's what's truly fascinating. The Byzantines didn't just store water here, they might have engineered these acoustics intentionally. The uneven spacing between columns isn't random. It creates pockets where sound lingers just a moment longer, perfect for conversations meant to stay private. Water wasn't just a passive element in this equation, it was an acoustic tool. The cisterns' ever-present humidity thickened the air, bending sound waves in ways that amplified lower frequencies while softening harsh tones. Imagine a conspirator's murmur skimming across the water's surface, traveling farther than it ever could in dry air, while the splash of a distant fish masked telltale pauses in speech. Modern engineers have measured the effect. Voices near the cistern center gain a bass, rich resonance, as if the space itself is leaning in to listen. The real genius lies in how the Byzantines exploited natural imperfections. Some columns were deliberately sunk into water at varying depths, creating subtle phase cancellations that scrambled eavesdroppers' ability to pinpoint voices. Others were placed at angles that deflected sound toward specific meeting spots, like the two Medusa head pillars, whose irregular bases scatter echoes unpredictably, perfect for disorienting unwanted listeners. Even the fish served a purpose. Their constant movement disrupted standing waves that might otherwise carry whispers too clearly across the chamber. What's often overlooked is how these techniques mirrored Byzantine diplomacy itself, layered, indirect, and masterfully controlled. Just as imperial envoys spoke in coded language, the cisterns' acoustics allowed messages to hide in plain hearing. A visiting ambassador might hear only fragments of a discussion, while a trusted advisor, standing in the right spot, caught every word. The cistern didn't just store water, it filtered truth from deception, using physics as its sieve. Today, as tourists toss coins into the shallow waters, the ripples distort reflected sounds in eerily familiar ways. It's a fleeting echo of the cistern's original purpose, not just as a reservoir, but as a chamber where power flowed as deliberately as water, and every whisper could tilt empires. Stepping into a reconstructed Celtic roundhouse, you immediately notice how the crackling hearth fire seems to pull every sound inward, wrapping voices in a warm acoustic embrace. These circular dwellings weren't just shelters, they were sonic amplifiers where the curved wattle and daub walls, thatched roofs, and central fire pits worked in harmony to create a natural theater. A storyteller seated by the flames could speak in a conversational tone, yet be heard clearly by 50 people lining the walls, as the round shape prevented sound from escaping into corners. The physics are elegant. Sound waves radiating from the hearth hit the walls at uniform angles, reflecting back to the center rather than scattering. Even the smoke rising through the roof played a role. The heat created a thermal layer that helped carry voices upward, while the thatch absorbed excess high frequencies, preventing echoes from muddying the words. This wasn't just convenient design, it reflected a culture where oral tradition was sacred. In a society without written records, every law, genealogy, and epic had to be memorized and recited flawlessly. The roundhouse acoustics ensured that a druid's teachings or a bard's verses could pass uninterrupted from generation to generation. Archaeologists have found evidence of deliberate acoustic tuning. Some roundhouses had raised earthen banks around the interior that acted as bass resonators, while others featured strategic gaps in the wall plaster to diffuse sound evenly. The most sophisticated examples, like those at Castle Henley's in Wales, even show signs of sound mirrors, concave niches placed opposite the entrance to bounce the chieftain's voice across the room. So why did these sonic marvels vanish? The Roman conquest brought more than just armies. It imposed an architectural revolution. Straight lines and right angles symbolized Roman ideals of order and control, but they also shattered the natural acoustics Celts had perfected. Rectangular legion barracks and villas scattered sound chaotically, forcing speakers to shout rather than converse. Where Celtic builders had worked with organic curves that mimicked natural amphitheaters, Roman engineers prioritized efficient space use and military symbolism. The difference was cultural. Rome's power resided in written scrolls and stone monuments, while Celtic identity thrived in the living breath of shared stories. Yet the transition wasn't purely acoustic, it was psychological. Roman baths and basilicas favored grandeur over intimacy, designing spaces where orators performed to masses rather than circles of equals. The central hearth, once the literal and metaphorical heart of Celtic life, was replaced by hypocaust systems that hid heat under floors, divorcing warmth from communal gathering. Even the materials told a story. Roman concrete and brick absorbed sound where Celtic wood and thatch had nurtured it. Traces of the old ways lingered in stubborn places. In the Scottish Highlands, roundhouses survived into the medieval period as Taig Sinni clan houses, where bards kept the oral tradition alive despite Roman influence. Modern acoustic studies of these late survivors reveal something remarkable. Their dimensions often match harmonic ratios found in Celtic harp music, suggesting the buildings themselves were tuned to the culture's soundscape. It's a poignant reminder that architecture isn't just about shelter, it's about how we hear one another and how those sonic landscapes shape who we become. The Roman preference for right angles might have won the day, but walk into a properly reconstructed roundhouse today, and you'll feel the difference immediately. The way the walls lean in to listen, as if the very bones of the building remember the stories they were built to carry. In the wind-scoured caves of Mongolia's Altai Mountains, the very rocks seem to sing, not with echoes but with voices of their own. When throat singers unleash their otherworldly harmonics in these caverns, something extraordinary happens. The limestone walls don't just reflect the sound, they multiply it, splitting single notes into shimmering chords that hover in the air like auditory mirages. This isn't mere acoustics at work. It's a partnership between human skill and geological perfection, where natural chambers shaped by millennia of erosion perfectly complement the complex vibrations of overtone singing. The science behind this phenomenon is as precise as it is ancient. Throat singing, or kume, produces two distinct tones simultaneously, a deep fundamental drone and a flute-like harmonic that rides above it. The cave's tubular formations and smooth, curved walls act like natural resonance chambers, amplifying those harmonics while suppressing competing frequencies. Modern audio analysis reveals something astonishing. Certain caves boost frequencies between 2,000 and 4,000 Hz, the exact range where human ears are most sensitive. It's as if the mountains themselves were tuned to hear these songs. But was this intentional? Local herders have oral histories describing singing caves, where shamans would conduct rituals, their voices transforming into spirit choirs as the walls answered back. Archaeologists have found evidence supporting these tales, caves with ceremonial artifacts positioned at precise acoustic sweet spots, and rock faces adorned with carvings of figures whose open mouths align with natural sound reflecting surfaces. One particular cave near Tsenjulkarkan contains a stalagmite formation that, when struck, produces a tone matching the harmonic series used in traditional kume, suggesting the very landscape may have taught humans how to throat sing. The most compelling proof lies in the cave's selectivity. While ordinary speech echoes faintly in these chambers, overtone singing triggers cascading reverberations that can last up to 12 seconds. Some researchers believe this wasn't just spiritual theater, it was practical acoustics. Shamans could use the cave's amplification to project their voices across vast distances, with the layered harmonics serving as an auditory beacon for nomadic clans. The cave's orientation plays into this theory. Many face eastward, catching the morning sun while funneling sound downwind toward traditional grazing routes. Today, the few remaining throat-singing masters describe the caves as stone teachers, places where apprentices learn to isolate harmonics by listening to how the walls respond. Modern attempts to replicate these conditions with digital reverb fall flat. The caves don't just echo sound, they reshape it, adding mineral-rich texture no algorithm can match. Standing in one of these sonic cathedrals, you begin to understand how ancient peoples might have heard these amplified overtones not as physics, but as the mountain spirits themselves, answering back in a language of vibration older than words. The night before battle, the Aztec warriors would raise their hollow-eyed instruments to the sky, and the air itself would scream. These weren't ordinary whistles, but meticulously crafted sonic weapons shaped like skulls, known as death whistles. When blown, they didn't produce melodic notes, but unearthly shrieks resembling human agony, the wails of the damned echoing across the battlefield. Modern reconstructions confirm their horrifying effect. A single whistle at full volume can reach 120 decibels, equivalent to a chainsaw, with a frequency range that triggers primal fear responses in the human brain. What makes these artifacts so chillingly effective is their anatomical precision. Aztec artisans didn't just carve scary shapes, they engineered resonance chambers with mathematical intent. The whistle's interior channels split airflow into turbulent vortices, while the skull's nasal cavity and mouth opening act like dual amplifiers, creating dissonant overtones that mimic distress cries. Some specimens even feature adjustable clay plugs that alter pitch, suggesting warriors could modulate their screams like a macabre instrument. Archaeologists have found evidence that certain whistles were tuned to frequencies known to induce disorientation between 2,000 and 4,000 Hz, the same range where human hearing is most sensitive to screams. But were these instruments of war or spiritual tools? At the Templo Mayor excavation, dozens of death whistles were discovered in ceremonial caches, often alongside figurines of the wind god Ehecatl. Contemporary accounts describe their use in flower wars, ritual battles where capturing prisoners for sacrifice took precedence over killing. The whistles may have served dual purposes, terrifying enemies while summoning divine forces. Spanish chronicles note how the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once during night attacks, sowing panic among troops who believed they were surrounded by supernatural entities. The real mystery lies in their sudden disappearance. After the Spanish conquest, the knowledge of crafting these sonic weapons vanished until the 1990s, when archaeologists rediscovered their function by accident. A conservator cleaning a whistle blew into it, unleashing a scream that sent colleagues running. Since then, researchers have struggled to replicate the original's exact acoustics. Modern 3D printing can mimic the shapes, but the clay composition remains elusive. The specific mix of volcanic ash and local clays gives authentic whistles their razor-sharp timbre. Perhaps most unsettling is what the whistles reveal about Aztec understanding of psychology. They didn't just weaponize sound, they weaponized the human nervous system. The irregular, pulsing screams exploit our instinctive threat detection, bypassing conscious thought to trigger fight or flight responses. In a way, these clay skulls represent humanity's oldest known form of non-lethal acoustic warfare, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't what kills the body, but what shakes the soul. Gliding through Venice's labyrinth of canals at dusk, you'll hear something remarkable. A gondolier's call bouncing off centuries-old palazzos with such clarity it feels like they're singing right beside you. These narrow waterways weren't just transportation routes. They were acoustic corridors engineered by accident and perfected by time. The physics at play are deceptively simple. Water surfaces reflect sound almost perfectly, while the tight spacing between buildings creates a waveguide effect, channeling voices like an open-air telephone line. A single "oh-hey" from a boatman could travel 5 times farther over water than over land, weaving through the city's twists and turns without losing intelligibility. What modern engineers find astonishing is how Venetian architecture fine-tuned this effect. Buildings lean slightly inward over canals, their stone facades angled to bounce sound downward toward the water where it skims to the next bend. Even the brickwork plays a role. Older palazzos use porous terracotta that absorbs just enough high frequencies to prevent echoes from becoming garbled, while marble accents at corner buildings act like acoustic mirrors, deflecting calls around sharp turns. Gondoliers developed a specialized vocabulary of piercing vowels and sharp consonants, stoli for stop, that cut through background noise, exploiting the canal's natural amplification. Yet step into any modern waterfront city today and that sonic magic vanishes. Concrete seawalls absorb rather than reflect sound, swallowing shouts whole. Straight, wide channels lack the gentle curves that keep sound waves focused. Even the boats themselves work against acoustics. Fiberglass hulls dampen vibrations where wooden gondolas once resonated like guitar bodies. The difference isn't just technological, it's philosophical. Venice's soundscape emerged from constraints. Narrow spaces demanded efficient communication, while contemporary cities prioritize visual grandeur over auditory function. The loss goes deeper than practicality. Those gondolier calls weren't just navigation aids, they were social glue. A particular cry might signal a fishmonger's arrival to housewives leaning from windows or warn of night watchmen approaching bridges where lovers whispered. The canals became a living network where information flowed as freely as water, binding neighborhoods through shared sound. Modern attempts to replicate this with digital sirens or smartphone alerts lack that organic connectivity. They broadcast rather than converse, isolating listeners instead of weaving them into an acoustic community. Perhaps the most telling experiment comes from acoustic archaeologists. When researchers mapped Venice's sound hotspots, they found something curious. The most acoustically vibrant canals align with medieval trade routes, where clear communication meant profit or peril. Meanwhile, quieter backchannels often trace forgotten pathways of political intrigue, where muffled conversations were preferable. The city didn't just use sound, it negotiated with it, shaping its architecture to amplify what needed hearing and conceal what didn't. That's the real lesson lapping against these mossy steps. Before we invented amplifiers, we built with sound in mind. Every material, every angle, every curve held acoustic consequences. Modern cities may have gained steel and glass, but somewhere along the way we forgot how to make our spaces sing or whisper when we need them to. The canals remember, though. Lean over their dark waters at midnight, clap your hands once, and listen. That crisp reply isn't just an echo, it's a centuries-old conversation, still waiting for us to rejoin. Across the vast emptiness of the Pacific, Polynesian navigators didn't just read the stars, they listened to the ocean itself. Their chants weren't mere songs, but precision instruments, with verses calibrated to bounce off waves and return as echoes, revealing distances invisible to the eye. Imagine standing on the outrigger of a wā kolua, your voice cutting through salt spray as you recite a lineage chant passed down 40 generations. The way those syllables reverberated across the swells told you more than any compass whether land lay beyond the horizon, or if a storm's edge lurked just beyond sight. The genius of these chants lay in their adaptability. Skilled navigators adjusted pitch and tempo based on sea conditions. Deeper tones for choppy waters where high frequencies scattered, sharper vowels for calm nights when sound carried farther. Researchers have documented how certain chant rhythms matched wave resonance patterns, creating interference that signaled underwater reefs miles before they became visible. A rapid-fire sequence might indicate shallow waters where echoes returned quickly, while drawn-out phrases worked best over deep trenches where sound took longer to rebound. What's tragic is how much of this science lives only in fragments today. Colonial suppression of indigenous navigation severed chains of oral knowledge, leaving modern Hawaiians piecing together chant meanings like archaeologists reassembling broken pottery. Some surviving elders recall fragments of echo verses, phrases specifically designed to exploit acoustic reflection, but the full systems of calibration are lost. We know navigators used vocal techniques to overcome wind interference, like tilting their heads to project sound beneath gusts, but not the exact teachings that once turned human voices into living sonar. Yet tantalizing clues remain. In the Marshall Islands, stick charts depicting wave patterns hint at how deeply sound was woven into navigation. Certain arrangements of cowrie shells on these charts correspond to distances where particular chant echoes would fade, proof this was mathematical, not mystical. When traditional voyagers from the Hokulea canoe attempted to recreate these techniques during the Polynesian Renaissance, they found the ocean still answered the old ways. Chants that hadn't been heard over open water for centuries suddenly made physical sense, their rhythms syncing with swell patterns in ways GPS could never replicate. The real loss isn't just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them, a world where knowledge wasn't stored in books, but in the body's memory and the environment's response. Modern hydrophones can measure echo delay down to the millisecond, but they'll never capture what those navigators understood, that the sea wasn't just something to cross, but a conversation partner. Each returning echo wasn't mere data, it was the ocean speaking back in a language of ripples and resonance, a dialogue honed over millennia that we're only now remembering how to hear. The roar of steam engines didn't just power the Industrial Revolution, it drowned out an entire world of sound. As factories sprouted like iron forests and cobblestone streets trembled under wagon wheels, something fundamental changed in how we heard our surroundings. Where once a town crier's voice could carry across a market square, now the clatter of looms and hiss of pistons reduced human speech to shouting matches. This wasn't merely an increase in volume, it was the unraveling of millennia of acoustic wisdom, where every building material and public space had been fine-tuned to carry the human voice. Consider the tragic irony of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Christopher Wren designed its famous Whispering Gallery in the late 1600s, where a murmur could travel along the curved wall with supernatural clarity. Just 2 centuries later, the gallery fell silent not from structural damage, but because the constant rumble of nearby trains and factories created an acoustic smog that smothered delicate whispers. Similar fates befell Europe's great opera houses, where composers like Mozart once wrote for spaces that naturally amplified every note. As cities industrialized, these venues stuffed horsehair and felt between their walls in desperate attempts to keep industrial noise at bay, inadvertently deadening the very acoustics they sought to preserve. The shift went deeper than architecture. Whole professions built around acoustic signaling, town criers, watchmen calling the hours, market auctioneers found their skills obsolete. Where medieval apprentices spent years learning to project voices across crowded plazas, Victorian-era workers now strained their vocal cords competing with machinery. Medical journals of the 1850s document a new ailment, mechanic's throat, a chronic hoarseness plaguing factory foremen who had to shout over steam hammers. This physical toll mirrored a cultural loss, the intimate connection between community spaces and human hearing that had guided city planning since ancient times. Perhaps most devastating was how industrialization rewrote our sonic expectations. Before the 19th century, silence held value. Churches designed quiet hours, when footsteps on stone would carry prayers upward, while libraries positioned reading nooks in acoustic shadows where pages turned undisturbed. The new factories made such refinement impossible. Workers returning home found their dwellings now built with cheap, sound-conducting brick instead of traditional wattle and daub filled with the neighborhood's clatter. The very concept of peace and quiet became a luxury, something only the wealthy could afford. By retreating to country estates, electronic amplification arrived as both savior and final nail in the coffin. Early microphones could make a speaker heard over factory noise, but they also made acoustic design seem obsolete. Why bother with whispering galleries when a megaphone could do the job? This thinking infected architecture. Modern buildings abandoned vaulted ceilings and resonant materials in favor of flat, sound-absorbent surfaces that blocked noise but also deadened natural acoustics. The shift reached its absurd peak in 20th-century concert halls, where engineers used electronic systems to simulate the reverberation that medieval cathedrals achieved through stone alone. What we lost wasn't just quiet, but an entire philosophy of sound as communal glue. Ancient amphitheaters brought communities together through shared listening. Industrial cities fractured them into isolated listeners, each straining to hear through the din. Today, as noise-canceling headphones complete this centuries-long retreat into private soundscapes, we're left to wonder, in gaining the ability to shout over machines, did we forget how to make spaces that truly listen? Today's architects and engineers are turning back the clock, not out of nostalgia but necessity. As climate change forces us to rethink energy-hungry technologies, those ancient echo machines are getting a second life in labs worldwide. Take the work at Switzerland's ETH Zurich, where researchers 3D printed a scaled-down version of the Epidorus theaters seating only this time, using recycled ceramic dust mixed with biopolymers. The result, a modern amphitheater that amplifies voices just like its Greek ancestor, but with 1/10 the carbon footprint of concrete. Similar experiments are happening with Maya-inspired acoustic panels in Mexico City's new concert hall, where porous volcanic stone arranged in pyramid-like steps absorbs traffic noise while creating rich reverberations for performers. What's revolutionary about these projects isn't just their sustainability, it's their efficiency. Unlike electronic amplification that requires constant power, these passive systems harness physics as their energy source. The Basque Country's new library features whispering arches modeled after Roman corridors, allowing librarians to communicate across vast reading rooms without raising their voices. Meanwhile, Dubai's solar-powered metro stations incorporate wind tower acoustics from Persian badgers, funneling cool air that also carries announcements clearly through crowded platforms. These aren't historical recreations, they're upgrades, where graphene-enhanced composites replace limestone without sacrificing sonic purity. The real breakthrough lies in hybrid designs. At MIT's Media Lab, engineers merged Inca Huaca stone arrangements with piezoelectric materials, creating smart rocks that harvest energy from sound vibrations. Imagine highways lined with noise barriers that don't just block traffic roar, they convert it into electricity using principles borrowed from Armenian singing stones. Other teams are training AI on thousands of ancient acoustic sites, identifying patterns our ancestors understood intuitively. One algorithm discovered that Celtic roundhouses achieved near-perfect speech clarity using proportions matching the golden ratio, an insight now guiding dementia care homes where clear acoustics reduce patient confusion. Yet the most promising applications might be where we least expect them. Marine biologists are testing underwater song walls based on Polynesian navigation chants to attract coral larvae to dying reefs. Urban planners in Lisbon reduced street noise by 15 decibels using Venetian canal angles in their alleyways. Even space agencies are interested. NASA, a lunar habitat designs include kabuki theater-style layered walls to manage sound in airless environments where every vibration matters. This isn't just about borrowing old ideas, it's about completing them. Where ancient builders had to rely on trial and error, we can simulate acoustics with atomic precision. Where they were limited by local materials, we have global resources. The irony is delicious. Our hyper-technological future might be built on foundations laid by civilizations that never flicked a light switch. As climate pressures mount, those whispering stones and singing pyramids remind us that sometimes the most advanced solution isn't inventing something new, it's remembering what we forgot. From Greek theaters that turned whispers into thunder, to Mayan pyramids that sang with the voices of sacred birds, these ancient echo machines reveal a truth we've nearly forgotten. Real innovation isn't just about inventing the future, but listening to the past. Imagine standing in Epidorus, where 2,000-year-old stone seats outperform modern acoustics, or cupping your hands in the Temple of Heaven's echo wall, hearing words glide along its curve like silk on water. These weren't accidents of architecture, they were triumphs of observation, patience, and a deep understanding of how sound dances with the world. What's humbling is how much these civilizations achieved without oscilloscopes or silicon chips. The Inca didn't need satellite networks when they had huacas turning mountains into telephones. Polynesian navigators didn't rely on radar when their chants could read the ocean's echoes like sheet music. These cultures treated sound as something alive, something to collaborate with rather than control. Compare that to today's noise-canceling headphones and speaker arrays. We've conquered volume, but lost the art of conversation with our surroundings. The sustainability lesson here is staggering. While our cities groan under the weight of power grids and fiber optic cables, the Hypogeum of Malta still hums at its perfect 110 Hz frequency after 5 millennia, no batteries required. Venetian canals still carry whispers better than any Wi-Fi signal, and Persian wind towers cool buildings without a single watt of electricity. These weren't just solutions for their time, they're blueprints for ours, proving that low tech doesn't mean low impact. Yet the most thrilling thought, we've barely scratched the surface. Archaeologists still uncover new acoustic wonders, from Armenian singing stones that induced trances to Celtic roundhouses tuned like giant harps. What other sonic secrets lie buried beneath deserts and forests, waiting to be heard again? Maybe the next great leap in green technology won't come from a lab, but from dusting off some long-ignored stone tablet or temple wall. So the next time you shout into a canyon or marvel at a cathedral's echoes, remember, you're not just hearing physics, you're eavesdropping on a conversation between humanity and the elements, one that began when the first architect noticed how a cave amplified her voice and thought, what if we could build more of this? That curiosity still echoes today if we're willing to listen. Now it's your turn. Have you encountered an ancient acoustic marvel that left you speechless? A hidden whispering gallery or a local legend about stones that sing? Drop your stories below and let's keep this conversation ringing through the ages. And if you're hungry for more mysteries where history meets innovation, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. After all, the past has a way of repeating itself, sometimes quite literally.